Hello. Next week I'm having a number of grafted plants delivered, sort of little seedlings, 6 varieties of tomato, an aubergine, a pepper and a couple of cucumbers. I'm putting the cucumbers outside and the rest are going in the greenhouse. I'll do a video about that when I'm planting them. But before they arrive, I want to talk to you about the management of the environment in the greenhouse. Tomatoes in particular are quite fussy. When they get big, they get unhappy. Their leaves start to curl up if they're too wet, if they're too dry, if they're too hot, and to a lesser extent if they're too cold. Now that's not necessarily a big deal if, like me, you're often out in the garden watching things and seeing how things are going. You can make adjustments as you go along. But if I go away for a couple of days or a week or a fortnight, then there's going to be some problems. Okay, you can get neighbours and friends to come in and look after the plants, but that can be, I don't know, sometimes a bit too much to keep asking people. And so I've developed arrangements with this greenhouse to manage the water in an automated way, and also in a less automated way, but nevertheless relatively efficient way, to manage the heating when it's very hot summer's day. So to start with, I want to talk to you about watering. So let's start with this water butt, which is on a platform raised above the ground in order to give some head to push the water through into the greenhouse. Out here there's just a pipe that goes into a connection which feeds a pipe into the greenhouse, and there's also another pipe that comes off it just to give me a hose to fill up watering cans. Okay, let's have a look at what happens within the greenhouse. That's where the pipe comes in from the water butt, and then it goes along the wall of the greenhouse to this manifold. All this equipment can be bought on Amazon. 3 of the outlets from the manifold go to troughs that contain the pots that I'm going to plant the tomatoes, the aubergine and the pepper in. And where they enter the troughs, they feed into float valves. Now let's have a look at one of these troughs in a bit more detail. I've tried various ways of building an automated watering system in this greenhouse. I've tried micro drippers, I've tried timers on valves on the water butt, but those methods, although they've worked up to a point, have all fallen foul of the same problem, and that is that they were delivering water at a particular rate, but they weren't taking into account the rate at which the plants wanted water. I mean, tomatoes can take up a lot of water, but at different times, and 2 plants next to each other might take up different amounts. So this system using a float valve is solving that problem from the point of view of the water being there when the plants want it and being replenished when they use it. Now those float valves, all the float valves in all 3 troughs, keep the depth of water in the troughs at a constant 5 centimetres, and the pots are on pot supports, sorts of feet that you might put under pots in the garden just to keep them off the ground, which raise them a bit over 2 centimetres. So there's 2 or 3 centimetres of the pot in water. Now originally I thought that would be fine for continuous watering. It seemed to me that I could put tomato feed in the water butt and the way I would go. Unfortunately that didn't work, because when I put tomato feed in the water butt, a white substance powder precipitated out of it, which not only meant that the water butt had to be cleaned out, but it also meant that presumably that substance was part of the tomato feed, which should have been in the roots of the plant. So what I do now is use the static level of water in the troughs as a sort of baseline, a sort of fallback option. I mean, if I go away for a few days or a week, the tomatoes will continue to be watered, or they won't get any feed. When I feed them, I do that by directly watering into the top of the pot. So I'll just demonstrate that. This obviously isn't feed, this is just water, but it shows you the effect. The soil level in the pots is about 3 centimetres below the top, so it's possible to just fill the pots up with water containing tomato feed. Now that obviously lifts the level, and it lifts the water level by about 1 centimetre. So these pots are always in somewhere between 3 and 5 centimetres of water, and that in my experience doesn't seem to harm them. In fact, the consistency of the water supply has been a real benefit. One word of warning: 1 year before I knew better, we were going away for a few days and I filled the troughs up almost to the top to give the plants enough water while we were away, and I'm afraid it killed them. Be very careful not to waterlog tomato plant roots. It's the quickest way of killing them. But I've found, and you'll obviously have to experiment for yourself, that having just the bottom 5 centimetres of these pots in water does no harm to the plants at all, and provides this excellent consistency of water supply. The yellow marker simply marks the static level in the troughs, so I've got some idea of how much water is in there above the minimum. Three of the outlets on the manifold go to the troughs you've just seen. The fourth one just goes to a pipe with a connector on the end, so I can use that to top up the water in the reservoirs underneath the grow bags, which I talked about in video 16. Well, that's the watering system. Now I want to talk about controlling the heat in the greenhouse in mid to late summer, when the sun is very hot and it gets like a greenhouse in there. Now, as I built this myself from bits of wooden materials that I could find, it doesn't have the subtleties such as opening windows and roof vents that you see in some commercial greenhouses. So there are 3 parts to my strategy to make sure that the plants don't get cooked. The first one is this green material, which allows a certain proportion of the sunlight and the heat through, but not all of it, and so that helps to keep the temperature down. The next thing is ventilation. During the summer I don't leave this aluminium door closed. I use this screen door, which is just a frame with some netting on it, and that allows an airflow into the greenhouse. The other part of the ventilation strategy is these boards, which are slotted into a frame at the other end of the greenhouse from the door, which keep the greenhouse dry in winter but can be just lifted out all the way down to the ground to leave a hole into the greenhouse, again with insect netting over it, so there's a good through draft blowing through. And as before, it's avoiding the very high temperatures that I'm really aiming at. It seems to be alright to leave this window half open or even fully open during the summer and during the night. So hence it's a good way of keeping things under control if I am away. Finally, inside the greenhouse there's a thermometer in a box here. It's in a box so that it's never in direct sunlight. That direction where the green covering is facing south. So I can press that button and it resets it, and it shows me minimum temperature and maximum temperature since it's last reset, so I can keep an eye on what the temperatures in here actually are. Well, I hope you may have gained some useful ideas from watching this video, and as usual, thank you very much for watching.